Before you watch this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what you are about to hear will shake you to the core. The world was asleep, but in Ouagadougou, one man could not rest. Inside a dimly lit office, Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk, hunched over a stack of secret files smuggled from the very vaults of power he was defying. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but also with something else: resolve. The documents before him were not rumors or whispers. They were proof. Proof that Africa's veins had been drained for decades, its gold, its oil, its very soul traded away for promises never fulfilled. Banks in New York and London had written Africa's future with ink made of blood and hunger. Western governments had signed contracts that enslaved generations not yet born, and now, the last page. A document so bold it made his chest tighten. A classified memorandum, signed by two names carved into the architecture of global power. Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, two men from opposite ends of the world, rivals in public but partners in the shadows. The file revealed what few had dared to imagine. They had both agreed that Africa was not a continent of nations, but a chessboard. And Burkina Faso, his home, his land, his people, was just another square to be sacrificed. Traoré felt the weight of betrayal crushing him. Betrayal not just from foreign powers, but from his own continent's leaders who had bowed, traded, and sold themselves to masters abroad. A voice in his mind whispered a warning he had heard weeks before, a warning delivered by a frightened intelligence officer who risked his life to smuggle these documents into his hands. They will come for you. When you refuse them, they will not forgive you. The candlelight flickered against the walls. The city outside lay quiet, broken by distant echoes of hunger, the cries of children, the silence of those who had no tears left to shed. Burkina Faso was starving. Fields once fertile lay barren. Gold mines churned wealth for foreign vaults while its own people worked in chains of poverty. And now this. A plot by giants. Traoré leaned back in his chair, staring at the shadows, the air heavy with dread. His choice was simple: submit or resist. The narrator's voice grows colder, heavier. What Ibrahim Traoré uncovered next would not only shake Africa, it would shake the entire world order. The screen fades to black. Burkina Faso, landlocked, scarred, forgotten. Here, survival was not measured in dreams, but in empty bowls and hollow stomachs. Mothers counted their children each morning, praying none had slipped away during the night. Fields cracked beneath an unrelenting sun, while trucks carried away the nation's gold to foreign shores. For centuries, Africa had been carved, divided, and stripped bare. First by colonial masters, then by modern bankers and politicians dressed in suits more dangerous than armies. And now, the International Monetary Fund loomed once again, demanding gold, demanding debt repayments that would drain the nation dry. But Ibrahim Traoré had risen from these very ashes. He was not born in luxury. He was born in dust. His youth was marked by hunger, by the silent grief of families abandoned by leaders who bowed to outsiders. He grew up under the shadow of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who once promised Africa freedom before bullets silenced him. That ghost lingered still. And in the quiet corners of Burkina Faso, people whispered, maybe Traoré will finish what Sankara started. But the world was not idle. While Traoré dreamed of new roads, new farms, and sovereignty, others dreamed of his downfall. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin studied reports of Traoré's reforms. His intelligence chiefs warned him, an Africa that broke free from Western banks was an Africa he could not control. In Washington and New York, Trump, no longer bound by office but still holding influence, plotted with financiers who feared Traoré's independence would trigger a domino effect across Africa. If Burkina Faso escaped their grasp, others would follow, and so an agreement was struck. Not in public, but in shadows. Russia would whisper into the ears of African warlords. America would manipulate the global markets, choking Burkina Faso's fragile economy. Together, they would corner Traoré until he either surrendered or vanished like so many before him. The hunger of the people, while the powerful schemed, the ordinary suffered. In the villages, grain reserves were empty. Children drank muddy water to silence their stomachs. Women traded what little they had for scraps of bread. Farmers who once fed the nation abandoned their fields, now owned by foreign corporations. Every day, Traoré received reports that broke his heart. A mother walking 20 miles with her child on her back, only for the child to die before reaching a clinic. A soldier deserting because his family had not eaten in a week. A generation raised not with hope, but with hunger. Traoré's enemies knew this. Hunger was their weapon. They believed that if they starved his people, they would turn against him. But the people did not turn. They suffered, yes, they wept. They buried their children. But still, they whispered his name, not as a curse, but as a prayer. The shadow conspiracy, 3 shadows moved against him. Not generals this time, but something darker, foreign hands cloaked in African faces. Russian money flowed into rebel groups on the borders, arming them with weapons meant to destabilize. American corporations cut off trade, crashing the nation's fragile economy. And hidden in the middle, African leaders betrayed him at secret summits, promising loyalty to his face while selling him behind his back. Every night, Traoré studied intelligence reports. The pieces formed a puzzle more terrifying than any battle. His fight was not just against hunger, not just against rebels, but against empires playing games with his people's survival, and yet he refused the deals. The IMF demanded his gold. He said no. Putin demanded allegiance. He said no. Trump's financiers demanded debt payments in exchange for survival. He said no. The burden was immense. His allies warned him that he was alone, that no African leader had ever stood so boldly without being crushed. But Traoré was unmoved. He believed Africa was not a piece to be played on the chessboard. He believed Africa could be the player, the whisper of fear, and so the stage was set. Burkina Faso, small, poor, landlocked, was about to face 2 of the most powerful men on earth. Some said he was reckless. Others said he was cursed. But the people whispered something different. Maybe this is the man who will redraw Africa's future. The setup ends not with triumph, but with dread. The narrator's voice lowers, but power does not yield easily, and the deeper Traoré pushed against the world, the darker the shadows became. Somewhere between Moscow and Washington, a plan was already unfolding, a plan to end his vision before it ever began. The screen cuts to black. Drums echo faintly, a storm building. From the moment he rejected their terms, the ground beneath Ibrahim Traoré began to shift. Markets trembled. Trade routes slowed. Whispers spread across Africa's capitals like smoke in the wind. Burkina Faso will not survive this. The West unleashed its first strike, not with bombs, but with numbers. The value of Burkina Faso's currency collapsed overnight, manipulated by unseen hands in financial towers thousands of miles away. Food imports froze at borders. Medicine shipments vanished in bureaucratic shadows. Hospitals, already fragile, ran dry of supplies. In the villages, fathers cursed the sky, mothers tore at the earth, and children wasted away in silence. Famine crept like a phantom, unseen but everywhere. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Putin's circle smiled coldly. Hunger was a weapon they understood well. A starving population could turn against its leader faster than any army. And across the Atlantic, Trump's financiers added their weight. Grain ships meant for Africa were redirected. Gold markets were manipulated. A nation already drowning was now being held underwater. Traoré stood at the center of the storm, refusing to bow. Yet the storm only grew darker. The machinery of betrayal Burkina Faso was small, but its defiance threatened to ignite a fire across the continent. And so, the machinery of betrayal began to grind. Secret deals were struck in African capitals. Leaders who once shook Traoré's hand in public now sat in private rooms with Russian envoys and American lobbyists. They signed agreements pledging loyalty, promising military cooperation, even discussing the partition of Burkina Faso should Traoré fall. The betrayal cut deepest when it came from within. Among Traoré's inner circle, a trusted advisor, a man who had stood beside him in parades, who had sworn loyalty to the vision of a free Africa, secretly passed his plans to Western intelligence. Every reform, every speech draft, every negotiation point leaked to his enemies before he could act. And yet, The identity of the traitor remained hidden. In the presidential palace, shadows lingered longer than light. Trust became poison. Every handshake was a question. Every glance, a threat. The suffering of the people. The true battlefield was not in parliaments or embassies, but in the streets. Children with ribs sharp as knives wandered barefoot through dust. Markets once filled with chatter stood silent, stalls empty. Entire families gathered around bowls of water, pretending it was soup. The famine became a weapon of fear. Posters appeared in villages, slipped under doors at night, written in bold letters. Your leader has brought you hunger. Submit, and you will eat. And yet, even in despair, the people did not break. Instead, something unexpected stirred. Farmers began sharing seeds in secret, planting crops at night. Mothers formed underground networks, smuggling bread between families. Soldiers who had once doubted their loyalty now swore silently that if the world came for Traoré, they would not let him fall alone. Hope flickered in the cracks of misery. Small, fragile, but alive. The shadows of Moscow and Washington. In Moscow, a secret council convened. Putin listened as his generals spoke of proxy wars, of destabilization, of arming African factions willing to bring Traoré down. Their plan was elegant in its cruelty. Flood the borders with mercenaries, ignite a civil war, and let Burkina Faso collapse from within. Putin nodded, but spoke little. He knew the danger of martyrs. Kill Traoré too openly, and he would become immortal in the eyes of Africa. The goal was subtler: starve him, weaken him, and let his own people turn against him. In Washington, Trump met with financiers and strategists. His tone was sharper, more brutal. He demanded sanctions not only on Burkina Faso, but on any African nation daring to trade with them. He threatened allies, blackmailed corporations, and whispered into the ears of European leaders. The message was clear: Traoré must fail. Between Moscow and Washington, the strangling noose grew tighter, the leaked letters, and then mystery. In the dead of night, a series of letters surfaced. Handwritten, stamped with seals of both Russian and American officials, they revealed a conspiracy larger than anyone imagined. The letters spoke of the African Project, a decades-long scheme to keep the continent enslaved to foreign debts and resources. The documents spread like wildfire, not in newspapers, but in whispers. Activists smuggled them across borders, students read them by candlelight, and elders passed them on in secret gatherings. For the first time, the people saw not just their suffering, but its architects. And in those letters, one name shone brighter than betrayal itself: Traoré. Not as the villain, but as the target. The world knew now. The people knew now. The fight was not about Burkina Faso alone. It was about the future of Africa itself. The shifting sands, but knowledge was not salvation. With the letters came more blood. Journalists who published them disappeared. Students who protested were beaten in the streets. Rebels grew bolder on the borders, ambushing villages, spreading terror. Inside the palace, Traoré's nights grew longer. His closest allies debated endlessly. Should they negotiate with Moscow? Should they give in to Trump's demands? Should they sacrifice part of their dream to survive? But Traoré remained unmoved. He believed compromise was death by another name. Still, doubt crept in. Could a small nation truly defy giants? Could hunger be defeated with hope? Could a dream survive the crushing weight of reality? The narrator's voice deepens, and so the rising storm became a hurricane. The pieces moved closer to collision. Somewhere between Moscow's iron grip and Washington's golden chains, Ibrahim Traoré stood alone. And every hour the cost of his defiance grew heavier. You will not live to see the future you dream of. Choose now, obedience or oblivion. The paper trembles in his hand. He looks out across the city, his city, where smoke curls from chimneys of hunger, where voices rise in whispered prayers, and then his jaw sets. For the first time in weeks, there is no hesitation in his eyes. The screen fades, the narrator's voice sharp, foreboding. The hour of confrontation had come. The world thought him broken. But Ibrahim Traoré was not about to bow. Not now, not ever. The summit of shadows, the world stage was set, not in a battlefield of tanks or trenches, but in a grand hall draped with velvet banners and cold chandeliers. It was called a summit for global cooperation, but everyone knew what it truly was: an arena. Delegates from across the world filled the seats. Cameras flashed, microphones hummed, and at the center, three men whose shadows stretched across continents. Vladimir Putin, cold, calculating, his eyes like ice, his hands folded as though he already owned the room. Donald Trump, loud even in silence, his presence a storm of wealth, influence, and threats. And across from them, Ibrahim Traoré, young, unflinching, carrying not the wealth of empires, but the weight of his people's hunger on his shoulders. The atmosphere was suffocating. Everyone knew this was no mere meeting. It was a duel. The dance of power Putin struck first, not with words, but with promises wrapped in barbed wire. He unveiled alliances forged in secret, warlords across Africa funded and armed to rise against Burkina Faso. His voice was steady, as if destiny itself was on his side. He offered Traoré a choice: submit and live, or resist and be drowned in blood. Trump followed with economic thunder. He unveiled sanctions designed to crush Burkina Faso into dust within weeks.
Charts, graphs, projections, all pointing to one future: starvation, collapse, rebellion.
He promised wealth if Traoré obeyed, ruin if he did not. The hall erupted with murmurs. African leaders shifted uneasily in their seats. Western reporters scribbled eagerly, sensing the collapse of a rebel dream, but Traoré did not flinch. He sat silent, letting their threats hang heavy in the air, like the weight of chains he refused to wear. The revelation, and then he struck. From a folder beneath his arm, he revealed documents. Not just rumors or whispers, but undeniable proof. Leaked letters, classified agreements, secret contracts, all exposing decades of exploitation. The screen lit up with projected images. Bank records from American corporations, siphoning gold from Africa. Russian memos funding militias to destabilize sovereign nations. And signatures, Putin's, Trump's, etched like stains across the pages of history. The hall froze. Gasps erupted. Some leaders stood, faces pale, as though ghosts had risen before them. Putin's jaw tightened. Trump's fists clenched. The trap they had set for Traoré had been turned against them. Traoré's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Africa is not your pawn. Africa is not your mine. Africa is not your market. Africa is not your slave. The words were not shouted, but carried with the weight of generations. They echoed through the chamber, unstoppable, undeniable. The breaking point, the duel escalated. Putin unleashed fury, threatening war, threatening blood. His generals whispered of assassins, of mercenaries already on the move. Trump roared with economic terror, threatening to erase Burkina Faso from the global system, to starve it into silence. But Traoré had more than words. He revealed evidence of their collusion, proof that their rivalry was nothing but theater, a performance to mask their joint exploitation of Africa. The revelation detonated like a bomb. The illusion shattered. The West and the East, enemies on paper, were shown as partners in plunder. Leaders gasped. Reporters scrambled. The hall descended into chaos. And in the center, Traoré stood tall, unmoved, his presence heavier than any empire. The standoff for 90 long minutes, the world held its breath. Every threat, every counter, every revelation escalated the tension. No one blinked. No one dared breathe. Putin leaned in, whispering promises of blood. Trump leaned back, smirking with threats of hunger. But Traoré leaned forward, his hands steady, his gaze unbroken. And then, he dropped the final blade, a dossier, sealed until this very moment, exposing the machinery of neo-colonialism not just in Burkina Faso, but across the entire African continent. Oil contracts, mining concessions, agricultural theft, all laid bare for the world to see. The screen filled with maps, numbers, names. No nation untouched, no leader innocent. The truth was now global. The conspiracy was undeniable. The turning of the tide. The hall erupted. Some leaders wept openly. Others shouted in rage, not at Traoré but at the empires that had stolen from them for generations. Phones rang across capitals. Protests began before the summit even ended. The streets outside filled with chants, with flags, with fire. Putin's face hardened into stone. Trump's bluster turned to silence. They had been outplayed, exposed not by an empire, but by a soldier from a landlocked nation too small for their maps. And yet, Traoré did not gloat. He knew this was not victory. It was the beginning of war, the kind fought not with armies, but with will, with hunger, with unyielding spirit. But for the first time, the chains had cracked. As the summit dissolved into chaos, Traoré walked out alone. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Leaders scrambled, but his eyes did not waver. He looked past the chaos, past the threats, past the fury. He looked toward the horizon, toward Africa's horizon. The narrator's voice rises, heavy, cinematic. In that hall, history bent. For the first time, Africa did not bow. For the first time, Africa stood. But the war was not over. The storm was only beginning, and Ibrahim Traoré knew the price of defiance was yet to be paid. The screen cuts to black. Drums thunder like war. The aftermath of defiance. The summit had ended, but the echoes of Ibrahim Traoré's defiance reverberated far beyond the marble walls of that hall. For a moment, the world stood still. Africa had been told to bow. Instead, it stood. But defiance has a cost, and the empires he had exposed were not about to accept humiliation. Putin returned to Moscow in silence, but his generals did not. They sharpened their knives, preparing covert operations to destabilize Burkina Faso. Sleeper cells were activated. Weapons were funneled across borders, and mercenaries were promised fortunes to plunge the nation into chaos. Trump, though no longer in office, still wielded the invisible power of wealth. His financiers tightened the noose. Food shipments bound for Burkina Faso were redirected once more. Banks froze what little reserves the nation held abroad. Every dollar, every grain, every ounce of medicine was turned into a weapon. The retaliation was swift and brutal, the strangling hands of empire. In the weeks that followed, Burkina Faso became a nation under siege, not from armies marching in broad daylight, but from invisible forces tightening their grip. Markets collapsed. Inflation soared beyond comprehension. Families who once dreamed of bread now fought for handfuls of millet. Hospitals turned into morgues. Teachers abandoned classrooms, unable to feed their own children, on the borders. Armed groups, funded by Moscow's dark channels, raided villages, burning fields and scattering terrified families into the wilderness. Refugees streamed toward the capital, their hollow eyes filled with fear and hunger. The empire's strategy was clear: crush the will of the people until they begged for submission. But something stirred that they had not calculated: the sparks of resistance. Instead of breaking, the suffering people began to rise. In Dakar, students marched, waving banners of solidarity with Burkina Faso. In Kinshasa, workers struck against foreign-owned mines, chanting Traoré's name as though it were a battle cry. In Lagos, women formed human chains around food markets, protecting them from foreign seizure. The leaked documents had spread beyond control. They were read in classrooms, shared in marketplaces, whispered in mosques and churches. Africans across the continent now knew the truth, that they were not poor by fate, but by theft. And in this revelation, Traoré became more than a leader. He became a symbol, a man whose defiance belonged not only to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. The shadows of betrayal, but symbols invite enemies. Inside his own palace, whispers grew louder. Some of his ministers urged compromise, arguing that survival demanded concessions. Others secretly met with foreign envoys, hoping to secure their own safety when Traoré inevitably fell. The traitor within his circle, the one who had fed information to the West, remained hidden. Watching, waiting, undermining, every night, Traoré read reports of plots against his life. Poisoned meals intercepted. Assassins caught in the alleys of Ouagadougou. Snipers sighted on rooftops. He slept little, ate less, and trusted no one. Yet his resolve did not weaken. If anything, the shadows hardened his will. The mysterious broadcast, then came the moment that shook the world once more. Late one night, without warning, a broadcast swept across Africa. It was not aired by state media, nor by foreign channels, but through hacked frequencies, smuggled networks, pirate radio stations. The voice was unmistakable. Ibrahim Traoré. His words were not polished speeches written by aides. They were raw, unfiltered, carried with the cadence of fire and grief. They starve us because they fear us. They silence us because they know our voices are stronger than their weapons. They betray us because they know if we rise together, their empires will fall. Africa, do not look to me alone. Look to yourselves. Stand, rise, fight for the future that is yours, not theirs. The broadcast cut across villages, cities, ports, deserts. Children heard it. Elders heard it. Soldiers heard it. And across the continent, fires of resistance began to burn brighter. The storms of reprisal. Putin was furious. His generals demanded immediate intervention, but he hesitated. Too much blood too quickly would turn Traoré into a martyr across Africa. He needed subtlety, patience, the slow suffocation of hope. Trump, on the other hand, raged openly. He demanded harsher sanctions, calling on allies in Europe to join the siege. He threatened African leaders who dared show sympathy for Traoré. Some bent, others broke, but a few stood taller than ever before. The world split in two. Those who saw Africa as property tightened their grip. Those who saw Traoré as a chance for rebirth whispered their support, afraid but inspired. The tension was no longer confined to Burkina Faso. It was continental. It was global. The fire in the streets in Ouagadougou, the people themselves began to transform. Markets that once stood empty became hubs of resistance. Families who had nothing began sharing everything. Farmers returned to their fields not with hope of profit, but with the belief that every seed was an act of defiance. Children painted Traoré's face on walls, not as a president, but as a symbol of rebellion. Soldiers patrolled not to suppress, but to defend. And when foreign-backed rebels attacked villages, ordinary men and women took up arms beside the army. The empire had starved them. Instead of breaking, it had forged them. The global shift, and then, something the empires did not expect. In Europe, activists marched, demanding an end to sanctions. In Latin America, leaders invoked Traoré's name in speeches about sovereignty. In Asia, journalists published exposés about the conspiracy between East and West to strangle Africa. The world was watching. The narrative had shifted. Traoré was no longer a small man from a small country. He was the voice of a continent, the question that haunted every empire. What if Africa refuses? The long night, Ouagadougou slept uneasily. The streets were quiet, but the silence was heavy, like the pause before a storm. Traoré sat in his dimly lit office, a single lamp casting shadows across maps, reports, and letters. His advisors had urged him to leave, to seek asylum in a friendly nation, to fight another day. But he refused. "This is where I stand," he whispered, almost to himself. "If I fall, it must be here with them." Outside, the people kept vigil. Thousands filled the streets, holding candles, singing in low voices. Mothers held their children close. Soldiers patrolled alongside civilians, every eye scanning for threats. The air was charged with both fear and unshakable determination. The assassins moved far away. In the shadows of the capital, black SUVs rolled silently through the night. Inside, mercenaries loaded weapons, men trained by Moscow's ghost armies, paid with Trump's money. Their orders were clear: strike before dawn. End Traoré's life, end his movement, end the fire before it became a wildfire. But history has a way of defying orders: the betrayal. Unmasked hours before the attack, a whisper of betrayal surfaced. A young officer loyal to Traoré intercepted coded messages. The traitor inside the palace was finally revealed. A senior minister, bought long ago by promises of power. Dragged before Traoré, the man begged for forgiveness, his voice trembling. "They promised me survival, riches, safety for my family," he cried. Traoré's eyes burned, not with hatred, but with sorrow. "You chose chains for yourself, while your people chose freedom," he said quietly. The traitor was led away. The night grew colder. The siege of Ouagadougou, 3 a.m., the mercenaries struck. Explosions shattered the silence. Bullets tore through the night sky. The palace shook with the force of battle, but they had not calculated the one thing that now defined Burkina Faso: its people. Men, women, and children surged into the streets. Farmers with machetes, students with stones, soldiers with rifles, they all fought side by side. Barricades rose. Fires burned. The city became a fortress. The mercenaries pressed hard, ruthless, and efficient, but for every step forward, they were met with waves of defiance. The people of Ouagadougou refused to let their leader die alone. The moment of impact, in the chaos, Traoré himself emerged, not hiding, not fleeing, but standing tall in his uniform and red beret. His presence electrified the crowd. From rooftops and alleys, his voice carried through loudspeakers and radios. "If tonight is my last night, let it be remembered that we stood. That we refused. That Africa will never again bow to empires." The words became a thunderclap. The people roared, the mercenaries faltered. For the first time they felt fear, not of death, but of failure. They had been sent to kill a man, but instead they had created a legend. The turning tide by dawn, the battle was still raging, but something had shifted. The mercenaries, outnumbered and overwhelmed, began to retreat. Reports spread that some had even defected, unwilling to fire on civilians who fought with such unity. The empire's plan had failed. Traoré survived, but the cost was heavy. Streets were littered with the wounded, the dead, the ashes of a night that would be remembered for centuries. Mothers wept over sons, fathers buried daughters. Yet through their grief, a strange, unbreakable strength began to rise. The fire spreads news of the failed assassination spread like wildfire. Across Africa, the reaction was explosive. In Accra, youth stormed parliament, demanding their leaders cut ties with foreign corporations. In Nairobi, workers seized control of a shipping port, declaring it the people's property. In Johannesburg, miners refused to return to shafts owned by Western companies, chanting, "Africa is not for sale." The fire Traoré had sparked could no longer be contained. His survival was proof that resistance was possible. His defiance had become a roadmap. The panic of empires. In Moscow, Putin's fury was volcanic. He slammed his fist on the table, cursing his generals for failure. Yet behind his rage was fear. Fear that Africa's unity could unravel his ambitions. In New York, Trump fumed to his allies. "We should have crushed him when we had the chance," he spat. But the financiers around him were silent. They knew the tide was shifting. The old ways of control were unraveling. The West trembled, not because Burkina Faso was strong, but because it had made Africa believe in itself again. The symbol beyond the man weeks later. As Ouagadougou rebuilt from the siege, Traoré addressed his people once more. His voice, though weary, carried the weight of history. "They tried to kill me because they feared what we represent. But look around you. I am not the revolution, you are. Every farmer, every mother, every child who stood last night. You are Africa's freedom. Even if I fall tomorrow, they cannot stop you. They cannot stop us." The crowd erupted, not in cheers for a man, but in a roar for themselves. The haunting legacy. And so the story of Ibrahim Traoré did not end with death, but with transformation. He became more than a leader. He became a living myth, a chapter in Africa's long history of resistance. His survival became a symbol. His defiance became a warning. His vision became a seed planted in the hearts of millions. But the narrator's voice reminds us, symbols are dangerous. Empires fear them more than armies. And though he lived, the storm was far from over. For the struggle of Africa is not the tale of one man, but the endless story of a people rising. The final question. The screen fades to black. The narrator speaks one last time, a whisper that lingers in the mind. They tried to silence him. They tried to starve his people. They tried to erase his fire. And yet, he still stands. But for how long? And when the next empire comes, will Africa stand with him, or will it kneel once more? The heartbeat echoes, slow, powerful, unending.